G'day expats, welcome to another episode of Expat Chat, episode 8, and I'm joined here today with my co-host Brett Evans, who's now moved over to Dubai. Welcome, Brett.
G'day, James. Welcome. Good to be back on the airways.
That's right. I mean, we're going to get back to smashing these out now. We're up and running. Obviously, we've had a rather busy few months, to be honest, and I mean, I think we're going to talk about that today as well.
Definitely. I think, today we'll discuss, expats' foray into moving offshore by setting up an office in Dubai, and also covering off some very topical points too. Certainly the main residence exemption, that's been a big huge one for everyone, and we'll cover off on a couple other topics as well too.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I want to touch base on some recent updates and blogs that we've done, just because they are pretty crucial. There's some important ones there relating to the US. You've already mentioned the main residence exemption and how they've reintroduced this bill again, which I think we're both pretty annoyed about and angry. And then obviously, lastly, I've got two questions that I want to throw out to us. I think they're good questions because it just, it's always hard trying to get those answers, especially for unique scenarios. So let's kickstart it. So Dubai, tell us a little bit, Brett, about...
We've got to do the disclaimer because those listening to the podcast again,
I always forget.
Yeah, no, actually, usually it's me. So just to all the listeners out there, if you're not watching this on the video, any information in this podcast is general in nature and you should not construe it as personal financial advice.
That's right. You're exactly right, Brett. So, Brett, tell me right now, whereabouts are you? Where am I speaking to you right now?
Well, I think the big pointy thing in the background there is probably a bit of a giveaway with the Burj Khalifa. Back in May of this year, I moved to Dubai. So I've now, this is my third time living overseas, and US and then Hong Kong before that. And now walking the walk and talking the talk of our clients again, which is great. So we've been spending a lot of time in Dubai. Actually been coming here for work, for the last better part of 10 years. But, to actually relocate here, move my family over here, it's, we can talk from a first person experience with clients who've gone through this process. So there's a lot of jargon I can throw out there that no one in any other country apart from the UAE will understand. And if I mention the word attestation, MOFA, and all these sort of things, people in Dubai will get the hairs on the back of their neck standing up. Issues with setting up bank accounts, setting up phone cards, Emirates IDs, we've done it all. So, and as you know, we've got clients in, more than 28 countries, and obviously you've been servicing that from the Australian office, but now with obviously a booming client base, it makes sense to now have an office in this jurisdiction because it's more conducive for looking after Australian expats, essentially from a time zone point of view, from an experience point of view. It's great now that, anyone who's sort of west of India, I can talk to within, a 4-hour time zone, which is fantastic. So we're having real-time conversations, and more so important for those based in the UAE, being able to sit down and have a coffee with them and talk through issues. As you know, a lot of the topics we talk about are quite complicated. And yes, up until now, we've always been able to use digital assets like Zoom and Skype and FaceTime to have those conversations. It's still great to be on the ground and sharing those experiences with our clients, but also keeping them informed and up to date on everything.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's important that we are over in that jurisdiction, I suppose, the GCC area, because a lot of the financial firms that are over there already, they have these sort of investment bonds, insurance bonds, where unfortunately a lot of expats are victims to them, even though they might only be there for 3 to 5 years, but they're sort of locked in these products which can be upwards towards 25 years, to be honest. So it's important to get over there, get out that message where those aren't your only options. And I suppose, that's not what you have to be subjected to.
The great thing about being here is there has been no noise to really fight against when it comes to us competing against other firms, because 95% of firms here are commission-based, as you say, selling Isle of Man, insurance and savings bonds. Interesting to note, and I haven't actually told you this yet, but yesterday the Insurance Authority, which governs a lot of these advisors, and I'm putting that in inverted commas,
Yeah.
has now started to make some radical changes with respect to how commissions are charged, in that you have to actually amortize the commissions over the life of the plan. You can't get the big upfronts now, because
So
as you
trying to
know,
align the, yep.
so as you know,
I was going to say,
yep.
oh no, is that trying to align sort of the interests of the investor or the client with the advisor, in terms of, the advisor is more incentivized to do a good job with that client over that lifetime of that policy?
100%. Look, it's gone from, in the past and still up until now, it's, expats are considered targets for these advisors, and all they want to do is sign up as many as they can every month. They don't care what happens in 2, 5 or 10 years time. Whereas if they reduce the amount of commissions being paid up front, and these advisors can be paid 10, 15, 20,000 US dollars up front, which is ridiculous. So
yeah, it is.
by removing that impetus up front, and we saw this happen when Hong Kong introduced the same sort of legislation, would have been 3 or 4 years ago. And within the first quarter of the legislation being in place, the sale of these type of products dropped by 45% in Hong Kong in the first quarter.
Okay, geez.
So,
oh my gosh.
so look at this, it's not good business.
No.
The conversations that we're having with clients on the ground here at the moment, it's the nature and the virtue of the Gulf region. It is a very, I won't say unstable, but, people are never really settled here, because the jobs are always changing, they're always moving. And not only do you have the issue of, I don't want to sign up to you now because I don't know what I'm doing in 2 years' time, let alone 10 years' time. But B, a lot of our clients, as you know, are satellites. And when they move around the world, you imagine if they moved from Dubai to New York and they held one of these bonds. The PFIC rules, the IRS would absolutely smash them. So there's no foresight as to what's happening with these, these expats. All they care about is get them to sign, get them to pay up, and then move on to the next victim, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, it's never nice hearing either a client has one of these, or, you're doing an initial consult with someone and they tell you that they've been sold on some sort of investment bond or insurance bond that's Isle of Man, and, it hasn't gone anywhere or done anything for the last 5 years in terms of performance, except for line the advisors, or I'd say salesperson's pockets, as well as the investment firms that offer them. And, they're usually promoted as these tax-free vehicles or tax-free wrappers. And essentially, you can invest back in Australia already, and it's tax-free depending on your residency. As long as you're a non-resident, there's different ways that you can invest, but there's always ways that you can.
This is the thing that makes me laugh, and to me it's marketing spin. Every week there are seminars being offered here, and the whole thing's been pitched as tax-free investments, tax-free savings. You live in a country that doesn't have tax anyway. So to me, it's almost selling on fear, as opposed to necessity or capacity. And as opposed to, you can invest anywhere in the world, and as a resident of Dubai, you're not going to pay tax here because there's no tax. So now, what's the best way to do it? And we talk about, sort of accruing wealth in the country, intend to return to or retire to, avoid currency risk, and those are all other issues. But you don't need to buy this thing to get tax-free returns, because you get that anyway.
Yeah, exactly right. And I suppose now that you're in Dubai, whereabouts is the office located, Brett?
Yeah, so in Dubai is quite unique, where we have, I guess, jurisdictions is the best way to describe it. So we have what's called free zones, and each zone will specialise in a certain sector. So you have the Dubai Media City, surprise, surprise, that's where CNN and all those guys are. Dubai Internet City, Dubai, and think of them like suburbs. There's actually no wall; it's just a demarcated area. We're located in what's called the Dubai International Financial Centre. And what makes the DIFC unique is we actually have a different law framework that we operate upon here. So obviously the UAE is a Muslim country, and by that, Sharia law is the governing law. However, in the DIFC, we actually have common law, no different to what's used in Australia and the UK. So when it comes to the way we operate, it is no different to how we operate in Australia. So we're able to virtually pick up Atlas Australia and put it in Dubai, and everything the same continues. Certainly we have other regulators to, to work with and make sure we're doing the right job by them. But, the benefit for clients is the Dubai Financial Services Authority, which is the regulator here. So that's their version of the Australian Securities Investment Commission back in Australia. They're very stringent in terms of rules and regulations of what we can and can't do. And that provides Australian expats, certainly in Dubai and the UAE and the GCC region, a lot of peace of mind, because they know that we're always keeping our nose clean, we're doing the right thing, because we have a regulator standing over our shoulder, making sure we're doing that like we do back in Australia. When you go what's called onshore, so we're considered offshore. When you go onshore, which is virtually stepping outside one of these zones, then you have these different regulators like the SCA, Insurance Authority, and those sort of guys and girls. And they're the ones who sort of regulate the onshore advisors or salespeople we talk about quite often. And they aren't as developed or advanced as, say, ASIC or the DFSA when it comes to their rules and regulations. So they're catching up very quickly, like we said before. They're issuing a lot of new rule changes at the moment. And, I would expect you'd see a swathe cut through advisor numbers in Dubai. Once again, advisors / salespeople. As the impetus for selling these punitive and pretty crap, products sort of goes by the wayside because they're not being paid these massive upfront commissions. So, to give listeners and watchers an idea as to, where we are, essentially imagine every major international financial firm in the world is here in this DIFC zone. So, our neighbours are, Citibank, Morgan Stanley, Barclays, HSB, you name it, everyone's here. So essentially what it is like a little mini country for financial services firms.
Yeah, okay. No, it's a good analogy to make then. With now that I suppose you're in Dubai, I want to, I suppose, hit you on more of a personal side, because now you're an expat, and you've moved over there. I suppose, as an example, getting the girls into school, how was that process, with choosing a school over there? I mean, there's many different international schools for, Gabby and your daughters.
Yep. Look, it's something that if you take the same approach, like we recommend clients take that approach when getting financial advice before you move, and prepare and plan well in advance, it's actually quite a straightforward process. It's when things are done at the last minute or, not planned for, that's when people, the assumption of just landing and then just walking up to a school, schools are very competitive here. It's very hard to get into the good schools. So we were talking to the school that the girls are in right now back in January of this year. And they didn't start till September. So it's something that, there's always, hurdles and speed bumps that you have to navigate when you're going to a new country, but nothing hasn't been, we could navigate every problem, I guess you could say, because, the schools are great. There's a whole system here built to support you. And yes, it's a different system, and you just got to take your Australian hat off and realize you're in a different country. Everything's different. And then rather than fighting it, just ask yourself, how do I fix the problem, or how do I get around this problem? And certainly it's a different process. When you get a lease here, you have what's called an Ejari, EJARI, which is virtually a registration of your lease. And that's the government's record of your, and everything's connected digitally here, which has been the thing that's impressed me the most. So you have what's called an Emirates ID, and the Emirates ID will be your nexus for everything. So when you want to go get a mobile phone, you can't get a mobile phone unless you have an Emirates ID. When you're setting up your DEWA, which is the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority, which is utilities, you need an Emirates ID and an Ejari, because they're two connected. And it's digitally, everything is connected to these very simple documents. Where the pain point usually is getting those documents to start with. So, getting either the husband or the wife, their working visa done, that's usually not too difficult, but then you can't sponsor your family until you have a lease in your name, which means you have to have an Ejari.
Oh,
So,
gosh.
so families virtually come into the country, and sometimes they'll do what's called visa runs across to Oman, because
Yeah.
they've got 30 days from arrival with about 9 days of buffer on the end.
Yeah.
But if their sponsored visa hasn't come through in that time, they'll have to go to Oman and back again to reset
Yep.
those 30 days. So
Yep.
that's a very common occurrence. In actual fact, there's buses that depart every day from Dubai Mall and down to Dubai Marina that do
Yeah.
runs out to the border every day, that you can pay about, I think it's about 250, 300 dirhams to,
Yep.
go across, and you virtually walk across the border and walk straight back again and jump back on the bus and come back to Dubai. So that's always a key issue. Bank accounts here aren't the quickest thing. The banks I've
No.
found are very friendly, but it's not a quick process. And they are improving that. I believe now you can actually apply for a bank account on your phone. But what will often be the case is you can't get a lease in your name until you have a bank account, because the check system here is still a very big part of the Dubai ecosystem. So essentially what will happen, and in the past it was you pay a year up front. You virtually give them a check and you pay for a year up front. Now, with the cooling of the property market, essentially now landlords are more sympathetic, so they're sort of going to quarterly checks. So when Mel and I took out our lease, we virtually wrote out 4 checks.
Yep.
So one for when we moved in, one for 3 months time, and 3 months time, and essentially the landlord cashes those checks on those dates.
Yep.
So they're post-dated checks. And
Yep.
the reason that
Sold.
works, the reason it works is because Dubai is one of the few countries in the world that still has what's called a debtor prison. So if you default on a check, in the past you could be jailed for passing a bum check. Now not so much. They've increased the threshold in terms of what the penalties are if you're passing a check, but there's a good motivation there to make sure you pay your bills. So, but you can't do a lease until you have a bank account, and you can't sponsor your family to come in until you have an Ajari, and you can't do an Ajari until you have the bank. So you can see everything's sort of linked in. So one thing that
I was just going to say, is there any sort of situation where it's a bit like the chicken and the egg scenario? I need that, but then I need that first, and there's sometimes impossible scenarios?
It was for us setting up the company, because we actually incorporated inside the DIFC. And to issue a employment visa, you have what's called an establishment card, and all the employee visas come off that. And when we're going through that process, they said to me, what's your local mobile number? We had to put that on your establishment card. And I said, well, I haven't got a local mobile number because I haven't got a visa. I haven't got a visa, therefore I haven't got an Emirates ID, and I can't get a local number. So it was a chicken and the egg type scenario in terms of, and look, you pick up the phone and you talk through this situation. They're always very sympathetic, and you always find a solution. But great example of that. But look, it's something that it's been a fascinating exercise to go through, and I'm actually going to write a relocation guide to Dubai that sort of talks expats through the key things. Get this done first, because when you get this done, then you get this done, then you get this done, and sort of all dovetails from there. And I'll write it very shortly before the end of the year, while it's still fresh in my mind, because
of course.
Look, it's just a different country, different system. It's not better or worse. It's just different, and you just need to understand the process, because people can tie themselves in knots. When they get here, trying to do what they did in Australia or another country here, which doesn't work.
No. And would you say, with where you are at the moment, obviously part of the GCC area, would you say some of the other countries in the area are similar in that sort of way that they operate with, an Emiratis ID, those sort of things?
It's usually when a country rolls out a new legislative framework, the others will watch and then, more likely adopt the same process. So they sort of, share/pirate content. Is probably the way to describe it. Like, that's a great idea. We'll do that as well. So I've found that Australian expats, when they're moving inside the GCC region, don't experience as high a pain point as someone who's coming into the GCC region for the first time, because they understand the nuances and how you navigate that and everything. So it's just one of those systems where, Dubai is very moderate when it comes to their cultural approach to the Western world versus, sort of the Arab world. So you don't really get brick walls in front of you. You just get speed humps that you just have to get through, and it's something that, it's going to be interesting to watch as we build up to Expo 2020 next year, which starts in October, because some ridiculous number of tourists are meant to come through, and watching how the UAE copes with that. I mean, at the moment, I think the numbers are going through Dubai Airport. There's about 100 million passengers a year going through the Dubai Airport. So, which they've already got these extraordinary numbers anyway, but in terms of coming to Dubai itself, watch this space, because I think, it'll certainly bring the country and the region up to a new age. Now we have Saudi allowing tourist visas. Up until last month, you could not go to Saudi as a tourist.
Yeah, okay.
So, so we're seeing a detachment of the Gulf region on their reliance of oil to other sectors like tourism and travel and all these sort of things. So, look, it's a fascinating time to be here during all this change.
Yeah. I mean, that Saudi visa, that's not a bad option for us now. We can actually get over there and say hello to some clients. So that's actually quite handy.
Look, that's right. And looking forward to that. And it's funny how when you look at all the different, I guess, geopolitical issues internally inside the GCC region, obviously, Qatar's an issue with the rest of the GCC region. So you got to navigate that space. You can't fly from Dubai to Qatar. You got to fly from Dubai to Oman, Qatar. So instead of a 45-minute flight, it's a 5-hour flight. And look, it's just the eccentricities of the Gulf region.
Yeah, of course. Listen, let's pause on Dubai. I know we're going to come back to that on another expat chat, because there's always going to be plenty of developments to talk about there.
Definitely.
Let's get a bit nitty gritty about the main residence exemption.
Yep.
This is a topic which we've been following for quite a while now. A good reference point is always our blogs. You'll know probably us writing more than, I'd say, 8 or 9 blogs on this piece over the last 2 years. And, let's touch base now on, they've reintroduced it. They announced it October. They put it back in, which is quite annoying. They've introduced some caveats. Give me your 2 cents, Brett. I know,
it's an olive branch. Topic. Yeah, I hate this topic, and it's an olive branch. They've tried to appease Australian expats by introducing, these life events and an excluded foreign resident. I mean, it's ridiculous to think that there's no apportionment still, and this is what the crux of the matter is. There's no apportionment of the time that an Australian expat spent in Australia versus the time overseas. You could be in Australia for 20 years as a principal place of residence and sell it in day one after, obviously, 1 July next year, sell it day one into your time overseas, and you'll be penalised the whole way back for 20 years, from a capital gains tax point of view. And the ridiculous nature of this, legislation, the fact that it's called the Housing Affordability Bill, no one can explain to me right now how this is going to make housing more affordable. Expats make up such a small percentage of property owners. And yes, it always grabs the headlines when, an Australian expat buys a property in Sydney for 15 million. That's one person, not the million expats that live overseas. And that's the bit that frustrates me. It doesn't. But
it's also their or the government's interpretation of what an expat is. They seem to have this interpretation that they're all, executives, millionaires, living abroad, but they've all got these houses in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane that are worth millions of dollars, and it's going to force a fire sale, which is going to cause this revenue raising, but it's not going to happen. And what really, I suppose, gave me the shits is that in their reintroduction of this bill is they haven't actually updated any of the revenue figures to reflect going forward, 2019 financial year, 2020, 2021. They're all looking back at 2017, 2018, 2019.
Yeah.
And the numbers they're quoting are incorrect as well. I remember I had a brief catch up with, I won't say his name, but he's the vice president of one of the Southeast Asia Auschamps, and they actually were going to get some time to sit down at a bit of a roundtable event with Scott Morrison, ScoMo, and I was talking about, I gave him about it was about 5 main points that they needed to drill into ScoMo while he was there, because each table, there's 10 tables, they all got 10 minutes with him. They sort of created some brochures and just kept drilling him, and it sounds like he didn't have too much, I suppose, to offer after I spoke to Chris about that. But essentially, they've just got no idea what it's actually going to do. You're right in terms of housing affordability. What is it going to do here? I mean, is it
It's not.
Just,
It's
I just don't
you
get
know,
it.
either expats are just going to hold onto their property, so
Yep.
zero change there,
Yep.
or they're going to sell before 30 June next year.
Yep. Yep.
So in terms
Yeah.
of making housing affordable in 5 years' time and 3 years' time, it's not going to change it at all. And that's where
No.
I agree with you, I question the budget figures as well, because they're forecasting greater than $100 million in revenue from these changes. But
Yeah.
once everything's said and done by 30 June next year, then, and if we're doing our job right in communicating these issues to expats so they're not caught, guess
Yeah.
what? Goose egg, bupkis.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
government's not
exactly.
going to get anything out of this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the government, they've forgotten to sort of factor in, increasing compliance costs as well, because many people that have bought their main residences, assuming they're not going to have to pay capital gains tax on that, they've gone abroad, they may be renting out for 6 years, they're not going to have this information on the contract of sale.
No.
No one's going to be keeping these records from 10 years ago or 15 years ago, because they were all under the assumption, I won't have to pay tax on this. I know I have the main residence exemption. I've got myself 6 years if I rent it out to do something with it. And then obviously, again, the piece of legislation, it's all about at the time of that contract of sale, when you sign that document, if you're a non-resident, okay, these new rules will apply. At this, if you sign it, you're a normal Australian tax resident again, whatever that means, it means the old rules still apply.
That's right.
It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't. And this whole life events thing, then that's nice to see they've acknowledged that's an issue, because it is.
Yeah. Yep.
Certainly if you die, your spouse dies, or a child, younger than the age of 18 dies,
Yep.
yeah, you've got to do some pretty drastic things. But why is an Australian citizen worth less at 7 years overseas than 5? This whole, 6 line in the sand, if you're earning more than that, you're excluded. Why should your wife or child be penalised if you die? Because you think about it, if you go overseas and you're on a 2-year contract, you do it 3 times. You're at 6 years, and that time goes like that. So look, I mean, I just think it's an olive branch attempt by the government to do this, and certainly you and I will get quite noisy about this. I mean, I'll probably throw some things at the screens when we watch the Senate estimates hearings, because the complete, I'm trying to be polite here, inadequacy of the Treasury officials' responses in the last attempt, where they couldn't answer anything, and they deferred everything else to the ATO or this or that. These are the people setting legislation and affecting real people. And as you know, this is not going to affect the big cats, the big people. It's going to affect nurses, teachers. It's going to affect everyone. It's just going to, it is the mum and dads that the government keeps saying we're looking after. They're not going to look after them. And the problem is the government does such a poor job in communicating these changes to Australian expats overseas that more than likely people are going to get caught in this net without realising they were caught until they get a bill.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, I suppose you can sort of appreciate to a certain degree these introduction of the caveats. Obviously you've mentioned the death and then the terminal medical condition that occurs within that 6-year period of the spouse or the child under 18. And then lastly, divorce. So, if that happens, which, sometimes that can be common actually in expats. I'd love to know what the statistics are on that, because it can be a case where, the partner wants to come home. They miss Australia, they miss family, friends, and obviously maybe the other partner wants to keep going with the career, and obviously that's when there can be that divide. So they've introduced these things as a way of, I suppose, preserving the capital, which I guess makes sense, but it's not enough. You're spot on in terms of why is an expat and Australian citizen's, I suppose, assets worth more at 5 years compared to that 7-year mark. It still just... I don't know. I'm just shocked, to be honest, that it's come back. It's resurged.
I'd love to know what the impetus is. I mean, the government's got to be in their bonnet about getting this through. But which bright spark came up with the idea of changing the main residence exemption for expats? Certainly if they were going down the route of saying, okay, rightio, there's a lot of Chinese coming in, they're buying properties, they're living in it and moving overseas and not paying tax. Get that. But it's very simple. Like we do with the state taxes, have a carve out for Australian citizens. It's
Yeah.
simple. It's so simple.
Yep.
You know, if you want to avoid foreign citizens buying up Australian property and then selling them for a gain and not paying tax, just say this legislation, you know, is exclusive of Australian citizens. And then we
Yep.
don't have to rewrite the whole box and dice.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
it's like that great analogy of NASA spending $1 million to develop a pen that writes in space and the Russians use a pencil. You know, why make it any more complicated than it has to be?
Yeah.
You know, we could just do a simple carve-out, amending the main residence exemption to exclude foreign residents.
Yep.
Or foreign citizens.
Yep.
So, you know, exclude the whole resident bit, just make it a foreign citizen. If you're an Australian citizen, you still get the 6-year MRE rule. I just don't know, I mean, the time, the resources, the money that's spent in getting us to this point, and it's still a bad result, is ridiculous. And that's where I'd love to see, you know, that sort of, I don't know, just a bit of common sense prevail. It'd just be refreshing to see that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, again, even though we knew about this in 2017, it's at draft stage. You know, we're coming close to the end of November.
Yeah.
They're giving expats, 7 months to choose to sell their property with this uncertainty. Imagine if this piece of legislation doesn't get enacted till April.
I guarantee it won't. It won't be before Christmas. I can guarantee that. Because, you know, the Senate committee, they will always be concerned about retrospective legislation, which is what this is, in spades. This goes all the way back to the 80s, you know, if they do changes. So to me, the big issues that I have with all of this is, you know, expats really aren't going to have any clarity until early next year.
Yeah. Yeah. And then again, making the decision, do I sell? Do I not sell? Do I hold down? If I'm going to hold it, I need to probably hold it until I choose to come back to Australia, which could be 5, 10, 15, 25 years, who knows?
Yeah. And it's conversations that expats are having right now who are about to become Australian expats, who are living in Australia, you know, as to whether you hold assets or not. That's the whole issue. It's you know, you went through one the other day with Haley Nathan. Hi, Haley Nathan. You know, going through, you know, a scenario of do they hold, do they sell? You know, and they shouldn't be forced into making a decision. They should sell or hold if that's the right thing for them, not based on legislation that may or may not come in and in what shape or form. Exactly
right. I mean, there's plenty of clients which they're umming and ahhing. Again, a bunch of clients that are coming on. They're moving to Hong Kong towards the end of the year. They're lucky enough to buy a property in Sydney. They've owned that property for 15 years. They're with this, you know, reintroduction. They're looking at us and going, what do we do? Well, it's at draft stage. So, you know, there's not too much you can sort of account for at the moment. You can look at both scenarios, but it's essentially, if they don't come back for 10 years and they need access to that capital, you know, they need to choose to sell it, you know, next 6 months. So it's just very unusual.
The analogy I gave a client yesterday was it's like anticipating something around the corner that you don't know what it is, but you have to prepare for it. You don't know what's around the corner, but you have to act like you do. Because if and when that event happens around the corner, your options will become very limited in terms of how you're managing your assets and your wealth.
Yep. Yeah, of course. Listen, we've talked a fair bit about the main residence exemption. I just want to quickly touch base on some recent articles which we've put up. And I mean, it's obviously not going to apply to every expat that's listening, but they are pretty important. Obviously, the main residence exemption, that essentially does apply to every expat. A recent sort of, I suppose, blog post that's gone up, as well as another expat chat, was that interview that I conducted with Jeremy Harper, H Finance, about mortgages. That was quite good. I mean, it was mainly about the 10 things that Australian expats need to know about getting a mortgage, and that process. I think that was pretty crucial. Obviously, some recent tax determinations which came about from the ATO on trusts. I think a lot of people need to know about those, because many expats, they still use family trusts, and they need to be, I suppose, understanding in terms of how, you know, these things can be treated, especially from a taxation point of view. Another recent one, which obviously was in our blog, you getting nominated as a top 50 influential advisor in Australia with FS50. So well done on that one. And then obviously, you know, as I said before, recently there's another blog post that went out about when you get a green card, when you're residing in the US, the exit tax and those sort of things. That's a pretty big one, and not too many people are aware of it, especially when you think you've got 8 years, but technically it's only 6, calendar years. And that article mainly centers around, triggering the Hard Act when you've been a lawful permanent resident, long-term tax resident, all those sort of things. So make sure you do refer to those. I do have some questions, which I'm going to throw out to us now. Just mainly inquiries that I've received recently that I think they're pretty good talking points. The first question, let me just read it out. I've got carry forward losses in my country where I reside at the moment, US, from the sale of shares. If I come back to Australia, is there any way that I can use those losses? Or we don't know too much, I suppose, about the individual's circumstances, but generally speaking, you can't transfer, I suppose, tax losses to another country.
Yeah, exactly.
I think he's probably trying to get out of some sort of capital gain scenario there, but no, tax losses are not transferable between countries, so that's a pretty straightforward one. The other one was actually about a green card scenario, but it was actually an individual. They've been in the US for 12 years now, but they've only owned, or been, I should say, on a green card for the last 3 years. They want to know whether they are going to trigger the exit tax if they come back next year. But that article that I did addresses that, and it's mainly around, if you've held a green card status or you've been I suppose, a US citizen. In terms of the period in which you've been in the US, it's only relevant for the green card status or the US citizenship. So even though you've been there for 12 years, you've really got to just look at that 8-year rule on the green card. And then obviously if you work backwards there in terms of you've been a lawful permanent resident because you've been on that green card status. And then, there's obviously the other tests.
I think the important bit to point on the green card one, and you highlighted exactly very well in the article, was, and just for those, who are listening on the podcast, we'll actually put these articles in the show notes as well, so you can have a look at them later. It's the not for the whole calendar period. So you can have started your journey as a green card holder on the 30th of December in a year, and that actually counts as a full year.
Exactly.
As opposed to, and that's something that's going to catch a lot of people out, because people just sort of just start date here, and you and I both see the conversations that happen on the Australian expat groups in the US about, it'd have to be 5 a day at least in the different groups about, I'm going to go down the green card route, and no one talks about these liabilities. Everyone talks about all these other bits, the bells and whistles of being a green card holder, blah, blah, blah. But no one actually talks about your issue as an Australian expat. What happens if I move? And we all know people move. I would say 1 in 10 would probably stay there permanently, but the other 9 eventually come back, even if they are green card holders. And I think this is where we often talk about educating, because it is a massive component before you take that next step from an L1 or an E3 into the green card visa route. Understand the issues. We try and do as much as we can in these groups, but we can't provide personal advice. But it's important that people are aware that this is an issue. This is a ticking time bomb, because what people don't realize, and as you eloquently pointed out in the article as well, it is not just your US assets, it's your worldwide assets. So if you've got a property in Australia, you've got super in Australia, let's say the property's worth, so let's be conservative, $750. And let's say you got 400,000 in super combined between the two of you. There's over $1 million just there. You don't have to have a lot in the US to breach that $2 million mark, even if you are below the 165,000, income side. So it's something that I think it makes me a bit sad in that there's so many people going down this route who potentially could, wind up with quite a large bill. And it's quite funny because I was looking at some of the comments when we posted that article in that group. People saying, "Oh, it hasn't affected me yet." Well, that's because you're still in the US. It only affects you when you come out of the country. And,
exactly.
And I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. So, certainly we'll try and get loud and educate expats and Australian expats on all these key issues, because if we don't, you're just going to see a swathe of people get caught up in the mess.
Yeah, that's right. And generally speaking, most employers who have you've been in the US for a while, they are going to push you towards going the green card path.
Of course,
They've
yeah.
got those visas, and it's easy for them for you to be on a green card. That's for sure. But I mean, I want to really, I suppose, elaborate on that in
Yes.
because you're right in terms of even if you get the green card 31st of December, that's counted, and it's not for a full calendar year. So even if you leave, in 7 years' time, in the next year on the 1st of January, that's counted as well.
Yep.
And obviously that's the first test in terms of being a long-term tax resident. And then you've only got to meet one of the other 3 tests. I mean, obviously the assets test, that's probably mainly going to be probably the one that a lot of people will trip over, especially if they've been overseas and accumulated a bit of wealth there. But the other one is certifying that form 8854, where people, they're not sure. They're not sure if they should tick that box. And because they don't tick the box, they've actually accidentally now just triggered the event of them becoming a covered expatriate.
That's right.
And a lot of people aren't aware of that. And I suppose in the future, if they don't go down the route, use a tax account to sort of get that all sorted, then that's sort of when they can run into an issue when they're re-entering the US and maybe getting another visa and, going down that path again. So it's a big concern.
Look, I think it's something that, as you know, we're spending a lot of time and money in infrastructure in the background to try and communicate better with expats. We've obviously done a revamped website and those sort of things, and good little segue to, say to people, we communicate on many channels.
Yep.
If you're on podcasts, you're listening to this right now, we'll keep you updated here on YouTube, and I'll put these links in the show notes as well. But I think also the other thing as well too is, on our website, you can actually get notified when we do blog updates. So if you go to atlaswealth.com for the first time, it'll say, would you like notifications to be showed? Hit allow. And then anytime we have a blog update come out, guess what? It pops up on your screen. So you don't miss these things. I think it's important that, I guess our remit and our job is to ensure that as long as you have internet access, in regardless of any other country you might have, if you're an Australian expat in the middle of the desert or in the middle of a city, doesn't matter what country, you need to keep following this information because the world is getting very small very quickly. And with the Common Reporting Standard, with FATCA, all these global initiatives, apathy and she'll be right, mate, won't cut it anymore.
No, yeah, exactly right. Sticking your head in the sand. I love how you always refer to that as well, now that you're in the sand pit as well, actually.
Exactly.
So,
but you're right. It is cooler where you are right now. It's hotter than where we are right now, which is great. So we're coming into winter, and it's a blessing.
Well, I mean, that's right, actually. I mean, one thing we should mention is all the fires that have been going on here in Australia. I mean,
it's a travesty.
Crazy. It is. It's going to go down in history as obviously one of the worst seasons. And I mean,
it's only just started. People, well, technically hasn't started yet. 1st of December.
No, you're
summer.
right.
And
you're exactly right.
It's something that it is getting a lot of airtime overseas. We've seen it on the news here quite a fair bit. And hearts go out to people who've lost their houses. Certainly the fireys, just doing us proud. And those guys are absolutely legends. You see what conditions they're faced with, and these are volunteers.
Yeah,
that is just, if that's not Aussie mateship, I don't know what is.
No, I know. And I mean, an interesting comparison I think they made, I think it was last week or the week before, was I think last year there was an article that sort of went out which got a lot of media time, which was about the Amazon and a huge fire there. And I think it was 150,000 acres they lost. And then they compared that to Australia, and Australia had already lost over 1 million acres to these fires. They're trying to make that comparison to sort of put in proportion for the rest of the world to understand that, because obviously the Amazon, everyone hears about the Amazon. But you're right, we're only just getting started. And I suppose I was telling a client the other day, if I looked out the window, and obviously I can see other sort of high rises probably a K away, on Monday I couldn't actually see that high rise. That's how bad the smoke haze was here. I couldn't see the crane or anything, and obviously a lot of people are getting infected that have sort of those lung diseases or asthma and those sort of things. So it's hitting on many fronts, to be honest. And you're right in terms of it's just getting started. It's very scary that it's not even, I suppose, December yet, and simple things like those thunderstorms that we commonly get here in Australia, those are things which are going to ignite these fires again. Yeah,
it is. And everyone you talk to, or everyone I'm talking to over here anyway, everyone has a friend or a family member or someone who's in the path of danger. It is, Australian expats are feeling the pain of Australia because they're watching it on the news. And sometimes actually it's worse being away because you don't get a full perspective. You just see what you see. And when you see walls of flames just going through and taking out houses, it's sad and scary.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll give you an example of that. Jessica, our CSO here, when she catches the train back home, she said when she got off the train, obviously halfway to Brisbane, you could see where the fires had actually gotten to. They were within 20 metres of the train tracks. There
Wow.
was fire crews there where she was. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like that's terrible. And obviously, so it's just an example of, it's scorching, I suppose, Australia at the moment, and it's only going to get worse. So yeah, keep an eye on it. Obviously, reach out to friends and family if you can as well.
Yeah, and I'll also put a link in the show notes as well where you can donate to the fireys as well. I think they do an amazing job. The death toll, the damage bill would be 10, 100 times greater if we didn't have those guys and girls doing, that stuff on the front line. I mean, that is, it's a cliche, not all heroes wear capes. Everyone uses that phrase on there, but those guys and girls, hats off to you guys, and girls. It is just an incredible effort to face up to Mother Nature like that and win.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a fair bit going on around the world at the moment. You see that recent news about Hong Kong, the university?
Yep. Yeah,
oh my gosh.
And look, Hong Kong's a big issue for Australian expats right now. We're talking to a lot of them, and a lot of them are sort of questioning it. People. My brother lives there, and has lived there for most of his life, not just adult life, but most of his life. And for the first time, he's very sad. Like he calls it his Hong Kong, and he said, "What's happening to my Hong Kong?" And I think a lot of Australian expats will be going through a similar thought process. Australian expats in Hong Kong, that is, as to is this my long-term home, or do I need to look at moving? I mean, now you have international universities calling back exchange students. And I think they're in a stalemate process right now because Beijing can't be seen to go soft because that'll set a precedent for mainland issues. If they are seen to be weak. The protesters in Hong Kong are now almost militant. They're firing arrows. I mean, what happened to the Yellow Umbrella Brigade a couple of years ago? I mean, that was peaceful and it worked. Now it's a sort of, and I really don't know how this is going to end because it's Beijing aren't just going to say, okay, guys, you win, but the protesters aren't got to stop doing this because now it's gone beyond. It's gone beyond what do you call it? Fundamentals, and it's now become an emotional thing. And having grown up in Hong Kong during Tiananmen Square and all these sort of things, it's not the first time the region's been caught with this. But I tell you what, it feels different this time.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, it's whenever you're seeing on news that Molotov cocktails are being thrown at these massive, I suppose, military vehicles, it's not a sign of things that are going to be easing anytime soon. But you're right. Sort of some clients have reached out saying, mostly I've checked in with quite a few clients that are in Hong Kong, see that they're okay, but also the fact that generally a lot of them are sort of umming and ahhing. You're right about whether to come home or whether to go somewhere else.
Yeah, look, and I think it's it highlights how, I wouldn't say volatile, but how uncertain an expat life can be. And we've seen this in different regions over the last 20 years, people having to, virtually up sticks and move because of a local, geopolitical event. And, people can be long-term residents and treated as their home, but, certainly when you have events like this, it does question your thought process, especially when you have kids too.
I mean, a lighter topic, I always love talking to clients in the US about Trump and what their thoughts are. And hey, a lot of them were thinking about getting out when he got put in. So
exactly.
So, it's hard to say. But I mean, I think that's probably, I suppose, we'll finish up there, Brett. I mean, we've covered some good topics there.
Yes.
I think it's a good time to wrap it up. We'll get you kick on with your day. As you know, what time is it over there actually?
10 to 11. So just getting started, and you'll be getting ready to pull up stumps soon.
Yeah, winding down slowly.
Yeah, exactly.
Good
time also too, just to ask people, we have seen people start to provide reviews on the podcast. If you love what we're doing, we'd love a 5-star. Comments as well. To us, that is obviously, it's not the reason we do it, but it helps us get a gauge as to, how effective this is, and feedback as well, because, the more feedback we get, and people can sort of throw in questions that they want raised at future ones, future expat chats as well. Certainly on the email info@atlaswealth.com. Also on Twitter, you can tweet us at #expatchat or on the Facebook page. All these will be in the show notes as well too. But the more dialogue we get between expats, the more concise we can be in answering everyone's questions. Because one thing I have found out now being an Australian expat in Dubai is there is a ridiculous number of urban myths, and it's nice to go through and start to cull them and cut them out, because there's too much misinformation out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of expats, they forget that even though, as an Australian residing in the US and as another Australian residing in Qatar, they're probably going to have similar questions, to be honest, about their Australian assets.
Yeah.
So it's good to be having those open conversations.
Well, it's conversations at scale. The bigger conversation we can have, the more informed expats can be. And that's all we're about, is just making sure Australian expats do things with the benefit of knowledge in advance as to what the ramifications and the changes could allude to. And also, one thing we've seen out of all jurisdictions is the goalposts are moving very quickly. So just because it suits you now doesn't mean it's going to suit you in the next year or 2 years' time, as we see different jurisdictions bring in different tax rules.
Yep. No, that's right. Exactly right. All right. Well, Brett, thanks for your time today. I'm sure we'll be actually, I'll probably speak to you quite soon, actually, tomorrow. So
exactly. So thanks very much, guys. And
thanks, guys.
Let's look forward to seeing you on Expat Chat episode 9 very shortly.
Speak soon.
Thanks, mate.